Heard every week on the amateur radio bands all around the world. Broadcast on low-power AM and FM stations all across the U.S. and one of the first podcasts on the Internet. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, the worldwide premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the earth as we come to air with edition number 1411 of This Week in Amateur Radio. The Hurricane WatchNet is looking for net control operators for the 2026 hurricane season. The ARRL currently has many job openings. Perhaps one is right for you. We will have all the details. A federal judge has reversed a previous decision and has ordered the Voice of America back on the air. Updating electronics aboard certain airliners is required due to interference from CW signals. A VE session at a New York City school is growing an army of new amateurs. The U.S. military tests long-range HF communications in Alaska. It is not too early to start planning for Amateur Radio Field Day 2026. The Dayton Hamvention and the CQ Amateur Radio Hall of Fame have both announced their winners for 2026. The ARRL announces the spring section manager election results. An FCC draft notice of proposed rulemaking is proposing to open up spectrum for what it calls weird space stuff. And a new documentary about MFJ and Martin F. Jew is now in progress. We will tell you all about the new film and a lot more news, and all that is straight ahead in this week's edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. These headline stories will come to you in a moment along with this week's special features. We'll visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT and what's new with all of those amateur satellites in orbit. Australia's own Onno Benschop, VK6FLAB, and Foundations of Amateur Radio continues with Part 16 of his Bald Yak project. This time out, he answers the question, how do you decode FM? Our own amateur radio historian, Will Rogers, K5WLR, returns with another edition of Dead Electrical Dudes. This edition's stiff is none other than Heinrich Hertz. And we will stop by and visit with Bill Sawyers, AJ8B in the DX Corner, with all the latest news on DXpeditions, DX upcoming contests, and a lot more. That's all straight ahead as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio, takes to the air right now. Reporting from our headquarters studio facility just outside of Albany, New York, where all of us here in the Northeast are still suffering with winter, I'm George, W2XBS.
And reporting this week from our news bureau in Cortlandville, New York, I'm Chris Perrine, KB2FAF.
Reporting live from beautiful Bradenton, Florida, where I hope to complete a couple more POT activations this week, I'm Mike Nikolich, K9DX Mike.
And reporting from our news bureau in Rochester, New York, along the southern shore of Lake Ontario, I'm Dave Wilson, WA2HOY.
And reporting from our news bureau in Wisconsin, where it's officially the first day of spring, also known as Second Winter's Opening Ceremony, featuring flurries, false hope, and at least one guy grilling in shorts. For This Week in Amateur Radio, I'm Marvin Turner, W0MET.
Reporting from our news bureau in Salem, Ohio, this is Denny Haight, NZ8D.
And reporting from our news bureau just outside Rochester, New York, along the southern shore of Lake Ontario, this is George, Kilo Charlie 2, Oscar X-Ray Juliet.
And reporting from our Troy, New York news bureau, where we're sure we saw leprechauns this week, I'm Eric, Kilo Delta 2, Romeo, Juliet X-Ray.
And reporting from our amateur radio outpost in the muddy Catskill Mountains of upstate New York, where mud season's in full swing. In fact, it's so muddy now the pigs are actually taking showers. I'm Don Hulick, K2ATJ.
And reporting from our news bureau in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where we're on the weather roller coaster of temps. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR.
Hello, everyone. Before we get into this week's newscast, I'd like to tell everyone that This Week in Amateur Radio now has its own Discord server. That's right, a place online where we can discuss everything technology and amateur radio. So join us. Just go to Discord on your computer or download the Discord app on your portable device and search for TWIAR or This Week in Amateur Radio. We look forward to seeing you on the new This Week in Amateur Radio Discord server. Today's edition of This Week in Amateur Radio is 100% human. And now, with this week's lead story, here's our own Chris Perrine, KB2 FAF.
Leading off our news this week, the Hurricane Watch Net, or HWN, is seeking net control operators. Among the criteria sought from operators and stations are those who are located in the central and western regions of the U.S., Canada, Central America, and the Caribbean, and available for overnight operations, midnight to 7:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Bilingual operators, Spanish and English, or French and Creole, and English are especially encouraged to apply. Because net control stations must manage stations across a wide geographic area during difficult propagation conditions, having a well-equipped amateur station is highly beneficial. A tower-mounted beam antenna for 20 meters, reliable 20 and 40-meter HF capability, amplifier capability for strong, consistent signals, reliable internet connectivity, as net control stations coordinate through the HWN internal chat system during activations, and operators willing to make themselves available when hurricanes threaten. As HWN marks 62 hurricane seasons of watching, preparing, and activating whenever hurricanes threaten land in the Atlantic Basin, it is preparing for the 2026 Atlantic hurricane season, which forecasters suggest could once again be an above-average season. Amateur radio operators interested in training to become a net control operator for the Hurricane Watch Net can learn more by visiting hwn.org.
ARRL is seeking talented individuals to join our team and help advance the amateur radio service. We are currently hiring for several impactful positions. RFI Lab Engineer. The RFI Lab Engineer supports ARRL's mission to protect and enhance spectrum access by managing and resolving radio frequency interference cases. This role includes database management, coordination with the FCC, and participation with standards bodies such as the IEEE and C63, and contributions to ARRL's Technical Information Service, publications, and member support. Candidates should have strong RF systems knowledge, EMC and RDF experience, and excellent communication skills. W1AW Station Manager. This is a rare opening and exciting opportunity to lead operations at W1AW, the Hiram Percy Maxim Memorial Station. Responsibilities include overseeing daily station operations, maintaining and troubleshooting equipment and antennas, ensuring compliance with emission standards, coordinating schedules and staffing, and supporting the ARRL laboratory when needed. Public Relations and Outreach Manager. Lead initiatives that elevate the visibility, credibility, and impact of ARRL in amateur radio. Responsibilities include developing and executing national public relations and outreach strategies, managing media relations, creating content across print, digital, and social platforms, and supporting advocacy communications. You'll also provide tools and training for ARRL's network of public information volunteers. The ideal candidate is a creative storyteller who can translate technical concepts into accessible language, build strong relationships, and deliver compelling campaigns that inspire new interest in amateur radio. Additional openings at League headquarters include Awards Program Supervisor, Development Associate, IT Support Specialist, Logbook of the World Support Associate, and Membership Manager. We value in-person collaboration, and these roles are 100% on-site at our headquarters in Newington, Connecticut. Full details may be found on the ARRL HR webpage at www.arrl.org/careers. To apply, please email your resume and cover letter to hr@arrl.org.
Are the HF bands useful for long-distance communications to remote areas? The U.S. military just did their own exercise to prove what hams have known for years. Communicating under simulated emergency conditions on HF, members of the military in Alaska demonstrated something that hams have known all along. Radio carries the message. The recent activity known as Exercise Arctic Connect might well be called Field Day or an Ares drill for the military. According to the U.S. Army's website, Over 30 operators in 28 different locations across Alaska recently took part in the exercise, a radio test to show that HF communications are vital in areas that are separated by extreme terrain, weather, and distances. The test was conducted by Alaska Organized Militia, which includes the Alaska Army and Air National Guard, the Alaska State Defense Force, members of the Civil Air Patrol, the State of Alaska Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, and representatives from the National Guard Bureau. Colonel Christy Brewer, Alaska National Guard Director of Joint Operations, said, "Our responsibility is to the people of Alaska. That means ensuring we can maintain command and control across a state where terrain, weather, and distance test every system. This exercise validates the partnerships and redundant pathways that allow us to respond decisively when communities need us."
According to the New York Times, the Voice of America broadcast service, which had been shut down amid controversy last year, is headed back into service. Judge Royce C. Lamberth of the U.S. District Court in the District of Columbia reversed actions taken last year by the Trump administration to shutter the Voice of America and ordered VOA's journalists to return to work and the news service to resume broadcasting. Judge Lamberth had earlier ruled that the appointment of Carrie Lake was illegal, hence voiding all layoffs and shutdowns, which she made. The Voice of America, founded in 1942 to combat Nazi propaganda in World War II, had been broadcasting in 49 languages to over 360 million people around the world when it was shut down. If Judge Royce's ruling stands, their goal is to return to that level. The Voice of America Museum, an amateur radio club in Westchester, Ohio, a popular attraction during Hamvention, is not connected with or affected by this current situation.
A story that we've been following about aircraft avionics now includes a federal mandate. The Federal Aviation Administration has ordered that airlines flying Boeing's 787 Dreamliners now have to inspect and repair faulty onboard transponders. According to a report at aviationatozz.com, the move is expected to cost U.S. airlines nearly $8 million. United Airlines, American Airlines, and Alaska Airlines, who operate from hubs including Chicago's O'Hare and L.A. International Airports, are among those affected by the FAA Airworthiness Directive. It states that certain Boeing 787 transponders can fail when they're exposed to continuous wave signals, including those generated by Morse code from military transmitters and amateur transmissions. Such signals, when encountered by the aircraft's Mode S transponder, may cause a failure to respond to radar interrogation. Air traffic control systems rely on those responses to track aircraft positions accurately. Without a correct relay from the transponder, controllers, quote, may temporarily lose visibility on their radar display. Additionally, the onboard traffic collision avoidance system may not generate alerts correctly, reducing a critical safety safeguard designed to prevent mid-air collision. Tests conducted by the FAA showed a nearly 90% failure rate of interrogation attempts in environments with CW interference, which prompted the corrective solution order. The directive applies globally to Boeing 787 aircraft equipped with the affected transponder model. However, FAA's financial assessment only covers aircraft registered to U.S. airlines that have up to 4 years to complete the required inspections and modifications. The directive has the support of Boeing and the Airline Pilots Association. However, operational concerns were expressed by several airlines who have requested a delay.
While hams around the United States remain optimistic over the hoped-for passage of a national law that would prevent homeowners associations from restricting residents' amateur radio equipment, Indiana's governor has signed a new law to provide such protection for hams throughout the state. Starting on July 1st, amateur radio antennas, towers, and feed lines cannot be restricted by homeowner associations in residential communities in Indiana. A new law signed by Governor Mike Braun will afford hams such protection on any property they rent, lease, or own within the association's purview. This is not a green light for all amateurs, however. According to the measure's language on the Indiana General Assembly website, House Bill number 1152 will only apply to homeowners associations that are formed or create documents containing such restrictions after June 30th, 2026. Meanwhile, at the federal level, the Amateur Radio Emergency Preparedness Act, which would create protections nationwide, remains stalled in Washington, D.C. According to the website govtrack.us, the bill was introduced into committee on February 6th, where it must be considered and voted on before it can move along to either of the two main houses of Congress.
A high school teacher in New York City, with help from the ARRL Teachers Institute on Wireless Technology, has successfully licensed nearly 700 students in the past 2 years as part of a wide-ranging program that is teaching students in 2 schools that radio today is a central part of just about everything. On March 12th, ARRL Director of Education and Learning Steve Goodgame, Kilo 5 Alpha Tango Alpha, and Hudson Division Director Ed Wilson, November 2 X-Ray Delta Delta, traveled to Staten Island Technical High School to help lead teacher Everton Henrique, Kilo Delta 2 Zulu Zulu Tango, administer license exams to 143 students, resulting in 131 new hams and 14 upgrades. According to Goodgame, Henrique's formula for success is getting kids engaged with lots of hands-on stuff. He says everything is project-based, and there is lots of crossover to the school's robotics program. Now, adds Goodgame, he's working with a teacher at the adjacent McKee High School, which is a vocational high school, and the students are working together on a solar car program. Wilson noted that he's very impressed to see the vocational kids and the technical kids working together, teaching each other their respective skills. Goodgame says Staten Island Technical High School is the donor-funded Teachers Institute's first model school, which makes it eligible for additional resources and equipment. He notes that the school was the site of a Teachers Institute session last year and will host another this year. Goodgame adds that Henrique has completed 2 Teachers Institute modules and is now an Institute instructor, as well as being a facilitator for Math for America and co-developer of a 9-week course for teachers on how to use amateur radio in the classroom.
The nomination period for the 2026 spring season section manager election cycle concluded on Friday, March 6th. There will be no balloted elections because only one nominee per section was received at ARRL headquarters. Wisconsin will have a new section manager starting on July 1st, 2026. Myron Ostrick, KB9STB, was declared elected as the sole nominee. He is currently the Wisconsin Public Information Coordinator. Ostrick will take the reins of the Wisconsin Field Organization from Jason Spetz, KC9FXE of Menominee, who has been section manager since 2022. The following incumbent ARRL section managers did not face opposition and were declared elected for their upcoming new terms of office beginning July 1st, 2026. Thomas Beebe, W9RY in Illinois. Bob Burns, AK9R in Indiana. Scott Roberts, KK4ECR in Northern Florida. Scott Rosenfeld, N7JI in Oregon. And Paul Gayette, AA1SU in Vermont. Nominations will be resolicited for section manager positions in Maine and Santa Clara Valley in January 2027 because no nominating petitions were received by the deadline on March 6th. Phil Dugan, N1EP, decided not to run for another term of office as section manager of Maine, a position he has held since December of 2021. In Santa Clara Valley, James Armstrong, NV6W, decided not to run for a new term of office after serving as section manager since August of 2020.
It's not too early to gear up and get ready for ARRL Field Day. With more on planning your field day this year, we go to John Ross, KD8IDJ, at League Headquarters with this report.
Field Day 2026 takes place on June 27th and 28th and will bring together more than 30,000 amateur radio operators for one of the most popular on-air events in the U.S. and Canada. This year's Field Day theme is Amateur Radio, a National Resource. Combined with the ARRL Year of the Club, it provides the perfect opportunity for radio clubs to set up stations in public places to demonstrate ham radio's science, skill, and service to our communities and our nation. All of the information you need to get started can be found on the Field Day website, including how to join the ARRL Field Day Facebook group, where you can share your plans, tips, and tricks for a successful field day. The overall objective for Field Day is to contact as many stations as possible on the 160, 80, 40, 20, 15, and 10-meter HF bands, as well as all bands above 50 megahertz, and to learn to operate in less than optimal conditions. Many clubs choose to set up in camp-style fashion with portable equipment, temporary antennas, and off-grid power sources. Field Day is open to all amateurs in the areas covered by the ARRL RAC field organizations and countries within IARU Region 2, that's North and South America. DX stations residing in other regions may be contacted for credit, but are not eligible to submit entries. Each claimed contact must include contemporaneous direct initiation by the operator on both sides of the contact. Initiations of a contact may be either locally or by remote. Also, check out the Field Day site locator page to help find participating stations near you. And as an added incentive for anyone participating in ARRL's year-long America 250 Worked All States WAS Award, contacts made with the ARRL-affiliated clubs all year, including during Field Day, will count towards your America 250 WAS-affiliated club endorsement. Check out all the details at www.arrl.org, America 250-was. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
For more information about ARRL Field Day, visit the ARRL Field Day webpage.
3 radio amateur operators have been inducted into the Heritage CQ Amateur Radio Hall of Fame for 2026. Professor David B. Leeson, Ph.D., W6NL. Leeson was first licensed in 1952. He is the author of the ARRL book Physical Design of Yagi Antennas and was a designer of the International Amateur Radio Union International Beacon Network. Since 1994, he has been consulting professor at Stanford University and is faculty advisor of the Stanford Amateur Radio Club, W6YX. He drove a race car, retiring in 1979, returning to ham radio after back-to-back national championships. Richard Dean Straw, N6BV, Silent Key, a renowned antenna expert. Straw was part of the Navy project in the early 1990s to measure HF dipole and vertical antennas in front of hill, on top of hill, and behind a hill in Utah. The team used a helicopter that towed either a 3-axis receiver or a transmitter that was developed by SRI International in Menlo Park, California. This system was used for measuring and verifying antenna performance, mainly for the military. Straw retired from the staff of the ARRL, the National Association for Amateur Radio, in 2008, following 15 years of service as the Senior Assistant Technical Editor. While working for the ARRL, Straw edited 5 editions of the ARRL Antenna Book, the most of any named editor, 4 volumes of the ARRL Antenna Compendium, editions 4 through 7, and several editions of the ARRL Handbook. He became a silent key in 2025. Dr. Jose Otis Vicens, NP4G. First licensed at the age of 16, Otis, known to his friends and fellow operators on the air as NP4G, developed a passion for amateur radio. Born and raised in Humacao, Puerto Rico, he is the only amateur radio operator in his family. Otis later moved to the United States to study biology at Purdue University, where he became active with the W9YB Amateur Radio Club. Otis is very active in Puerto Rico's ham radio scene. He is past president of the Puerto Rican Amateur Radio League and is currently president of the International DX Association. Otis also received the 2026 Amateur of the Year Award from the Dayton Hamvention. You can read more about the 2026 inductees at the Heritage CQ Amateur Radio Hall of Fame, created by CQ Magazine and currently administered by the K8CX Ham Gallery.
Symbols of national pride and national identity are not being permitted at this year's World Radio Sport Team Championship. Spectators and participants can expect to see plenty of things at the World Radio Sport Team Championship event in the United Kingdom this coming July. There will be antennas, rigs, cables, microphones, and keys, and plenty of spectators to cheer on the hams using them. What will not be evident anywhere are any emblems, flags, or other symbols of national identity. The organizing committee of WRTC 2026 has reaffirmed the approach that was used during WRTC event held in 2023 in Bologna, Italy. That means that, as before, this year's teams will avoid national symbols of any kind. This is especially significant because it is consistent with the competition's qualification process, which identifies all participants by qualification area and not by their DXCC. Like the Olympics, the WRTC is held every 4 years with different host countries each time. They include Brazil, Finland, Germany, Russia, Slovenia, and in the United States, in San Francisco, Boston, and Seattle.
The worlds of amateur radio and ionospheric science came together once again on March 14th and 15th at the 9th Annual HamSCI Workshop. To tell us more about this year's workshop, we go to League headquarters, where John Ross, KD8IDJ, files this report.
This year, HamSCI 2026 was hosted by ARRL and held at Central Connecticut State University, just minutes away from ARRL headquarters in Newington, Connecticut. HamSCI, the Ham Radio Science Citizen Investigation Program, encourages radio amateurs to collect data that scientists use in their research on ionospheric phenomena. This year's workshop featured 17 oral presentations, 3 tutorials, 5 demonstrations, and 31 posters, and through researchers from Virginia Tech, St. Francis University, Dartmouth College, Boston College, and others. ARRL CEO David Minster, NA2AA, welcomed participants at the conference opening, followed by Dr. Nathaniel Fussell, W2NAF, lead organizer of the HamSCI community, who set the stage for the weekend's activities. The keynote speaker at Saturday evening's banquet was NASA astrophysicist and citizen science officer Dr. Mark Kuchner. The workshop also included a field trip to tour ARRL headquarters, and attendees were invited to participate in late-night operating from the iconic W1AW station. One overriding theme of the conference was that you don't need to be a physicist to contribute to valuable data. HamSCI's basic personal space weather station, which costs about $100, can observe space weather effects both as a single-point measurement and as part of a larger distributed network. The group has made data collection fun with such activities as the Solar Eclipse QSO Party and Meteor Scattered QSO Party. One presentation demonstrated how ham observations and measurements captured ionospheric effects during 2 recent solar eclipses. At Sunday morning's poster session, University of Scranton student Owen Rozansky, KD3ALD, described a project to develop a dashboard of HF contesting, DXing, and general operations using data from the Personal Space Weather Station and other remote sources. The project is intended to enhance the real-time propagation assessments sought by amateur radio operators. For many participants, the chance to operate from W1AW was a highlight of the weekend. ARRL Senior Director of Marketing and Innovation Bob Interbitson, NQ1R, described the atmosphere at the station as energetic. All 6 guest operating positions were occupied until closing time at 11:30 p.m. on Saturday. ARRL extends its thanks to many partners supporting HamSCI 2026, including the University of Scranton, New Jersey Institute of Technology, the National Science Foundation, NASA, Amateur Radio Digital Communications, and more. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Participants were treated to a first-ever 630-meter contact from W1AW, a contact with the J51AD expedition to Guinea-Bissau, and a QSO between W1AW and a remotely controlled station in Bonaire, operated by Bob Interbitson as PJ4NQ1R, with both control operators in the same room. The roughly 35 visiting operators had a chance to use equipment from multiple manufacturers, notably ICOM, Yaesu, Kenwood, and Flex Radio. Ryusuke Takada, JI1 VHV, who had traveled from Japan to attend the workshop, made 46 contacts in 20 minutes. Each visitor left with a personalized certificate, and several considered it to be a once-in-a-lifetime experience.
Hello and welcome to the DX Corner for your weekly dose of DX. I'm Bill, AJ8B. The 2011 T-32 Charlie D Expedition QSO record of 213,022 has been shattered by the German 5-man team at J51 Alpha. As of March 11th, the J51A team had 217,671 contacts in just 16 days. T-32C was back in the day before the current digital modes of FT4 and FT8. During their D-expedition, that team operated for 30 days and had 48,966 unique contacts, a record that still stands. Congrats to the new QSO record at Team J51 Alpha, and they still have 4 more days to go. Well, since that came out, we know how they finished. Quote, we have an update from J51 Alpha. They finished with 255,639 QSOs and 49,600 different call signs, which was also a record. They are now QRT. Remember, they have 5 people traveling with 18 suitcases, 2 oversized ski bags, 6 pieces of hand luggage containing the bandpass filters and triplexers, and 5 backpacks containing the radios and power supplies. That sums up 600 kilograms of gross weight. Congrats to the Germans at G51 Alpha for a fantastic effort. It is well done. And speaking of great efforts, we have an update on 3 Yankee Zero Kilo, Bouvet Island. The entire 3 Yankee Zero Kilo team is safely back on the vessel after a successful expedition to Bouvetoya. We made more than 100,000 contacts and achieved our goals. It was an extraordinary undertaking involving years of planning, complex logistics, and determination needed to succeed. The team worked well together under harsh conditions, cold, snow, and windy weather. Bouvetoya is known for its remoteness and unpredictable weather, and while it was a beautiful island, any attempt going onshore involved a risk. Despite all the challenges we encountered, the team stayed focused on our goals, determined, and the result is due to real teamwork. We've been working with professional expedition guides, pilots, crews, and a vessel that all contributed to the success. We wish to thank everyone who believed in us, supported us, and made this a great expedition. Thanks to all of our individual sponsors, clubs, organizations, and corporate sponsors for their contribution. Our logs will soon be open for OQRS, 7-3 from the 3 Yankee Zero Kilo team. And really, hats off to them in both of those DXpeditions. That was fantastic. The following DX information comes from Bernie, W3UR, editor of the Daily DX, the Weekly DX, and the How's DX column in QST. If you would like a free 2-week trial of the Daily DX, your only source of real-time DX information, just drop me a note at thedxmentor@gmail.com. Well, let's get an update on a couple of ongoing DXpeditions. The first is the Charlie Yankee Zero Sierra DXpedition to Canada. Travel has begun for the CY0S team. Glenn W0GJ departed his home in Iowa in the very early hours of Wednesday morning en route to North Carolina to meet up with WA4DAN. Glenn is projected to arrive at the home of WA4DAN by late on Thursday, the 12th. On Friday, Glenn and Murray will go through the checklist of all the gear. This includes the long ski bags with the antennas and spider poles. Each bag will be opened, inventory, and weighed to make sure that all is accounted for. In the ski bags are the antennas, spider poles, guy rings with guy ropes already measured and attached with 42-inch long wood guy stakes for the loose sand on Sable Island. Glenn and Murray began their long drive to Nova Scotia on Saturday morning with projected arrival by late afternoon on Monday. The team members continued to monitor the weather forecast for Halifax, Nova Scotia, as well as Sable Island. The extended forecast is for rain on Monday the 16th and Tuesday the 17th. The flights to the island are scheduled for Wednesday the 18th. A weigh-in of team gear will be conducted on Tuesday at our aviation partners' hangars. Thank you to Sable Aviation and Vision Air Services for working with us again on this expedition. Now, I do know that the first plane had landed and a couple of operators were already on Sable Island, and honestly, by the time you're listening to this, they'll probably be QRV. So here's an update on Tango X-Ray 5 Echo Uniform up to Austral Islands. Quote, we finally made it to our new Tango X-Ray 5 Echo United QTH on Austral Island, Rivave, and started setting up antennas and equipment. So far, 5 of the 9 antennas are already set up. This includes VDAs on 20 meter, 15, and 12 meters, the DX Commander, and the 40-meter vertical. The rest will follow tomorrow morning after sunrise and quick coffee. Operation will start around 6 a.m. GMT on the evening of March 13th. Watch for our first signals to come out strong. 7-3 from the TX5 Echo United group. Well, now I have 2 updates on Central Kiribati, Tango 31. The Rebel DX group said that their upcoming Tango 31 Tango activity, starting around March 25th on Canton Island, will likely be their last operation, quote, for some considerable time, end quote, similar to their 3 Delta 2 Charlie Conway Reef operation. They say they are joining government officials and a Ministry of Fishery and Environmental delegation, and note that the rules are changing soon, including likely a lockdown of access for visitors for environmental protection reasons. We have a second update then, a few days later. The Rebel DX Group's upcoming Tango 31 Tango 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 operation, which is scheduled to start around March 25th, gave us this update. Preparations are complete with the ship loaded with supplies, fuel, and generators. They are now on their way to Fiji, headed to Samoa to be joined by 7 Kiribati government officials who will be part of the trip to Canton Atoll. And if you don't have Tango 31, you may want to make sure you get this one in the log, because if they really tighten up the screws to who can visit, it may be a long time before they get going again. The group going to Honduras, which is Hotel Radio, which includes KN2 Papa, Nancy 7 Victor Zulu, and W7UM, have gotten their call sign for the Honduras de-expedition from the new government and new commissioner for telecom. The call sign is Hotel Quebec 9 United Mike, and the dates are March 24th to the 31st. They will be on 160 through 10 meter sideband CW and FT8 and will be using LOTW for QSLing. And they have the HQ9 X-ray call sign for the CQ Worldwide Single Sideband Weekend Contest. Otherwise, they will be holiday style. I have a hunch, knowing some of those operators, you're going to hear them a lot. From Sri Lanka, which is 4 Sierra, I have this. Andre, Radio 8 Whiskey X-ray, will be active as 4 Sierra 7 Whiskey X-ray George, primarily from a villa in Matarik, Sri Lanka, between March 19th and March 25th, and potentially from a hotel in Hikadawu from March 25th to March 27th. On March 21 and 22, Andre will focus on operating in the RDXC, prioritizing competition participating over other activities. Operations will mainly be on CW and sideband on bands 28 MHz to 3.5 MHz and potentially 1.8 MHz with 100 watts of power and various antennas such as an inverted V, a ground plane, or a vertical, using a Sun SDR2 DX receiver. QSL options include Hamlog, LOTW, Direct, and the QSL Bureau. This trip combines an on-air time with family vacation. For his upcoming 3 Golf Zero Yankee Echo, which is Easter Island, from March 28th to April 11th, Marcus, Delta Juliet 4 Echo Lima, will bring several antennas, a 14-meter pole fitted with quad antennas for 10, 15, 20, a 12-meter pole with a quad antenna for 6, 12, and 17, and a 10-meter pole supporting a quarter-wave vertical antenna for the 40-meter band. So look for Easter Island. From the Zambia, which is 9 Juliet, we have Robert, Delta Mike 7 X-ray, who will be operating as 9 Juliet 2 Radio Oscar from the Fountain Gate Crafts and Trade School, March 16th to the 30th. So he's already QRV, and he will be participating in the CQ WPX single sideband contest, which is March 28th and 29th. And we have a couple from Vanuatu, which is Yankee Juliet. Victor Kilo 2 Yankee Uniform Sierra, Chris, plans an operation as Yankee Juliet 0 Charlie Alpha. He will be at Port Vila from March 18th to April 2nd, single sideband only. The same gear as previously, an IC 7300 to a small amplifier and simple wire antennas on 40 through 10 meters. He says his main operating times will likely be between 2100 and 1000 Zulu. Chris logs on the paper and then has a, quote, high-quality physical card for confirmation. Cards will be sent out airmail in April from Australia. And you can check QRZ.com for the details on his QSL address, etc. And then from Vanuatu, again, Yankee Juliet, we have Aki, Juliet Kilo 1, Juliet X-Ray Zulu, who will operate as Yankee Juliet 1, Yankee X-Ray Zulu from Port Vila, Vanuatu, between March 15th and April 3rd. He should be QRV by now. And he will be active on 80 through 6 meters after 5 p.m. local time on weekdays and all day on weekends. From St. Bartholomew, Fox Juliet, we have this. Delta Kilo 6 Alpha Sierra Andreas is now active from St. Bart's as Fox Juliet stroke Delta Kilo 6 Alpha Sierra for the month of March. He is QRV on CW, FT4, and FT8 on 3.5 through 50 megahertz, including participation in the ARRL International DXCW contest. QSL via Delta Kilo 6 Alpha Sierra. Victor Papa 2 Echo, which is Anguilla, Jack M0 Papa Lima X-Ray, SP9 Fox India Hotel, and SQ2 Radio Alpha Delta will be QRV from Anguilla until March 22nd, so just a couple more days. They will use the call signs VP2 Echo Lima X-Ray and VP2 Echo Whiskey Echo, respectively. Their activities will cover 160 through 6 meters, with each operator focusing on specific frequencies. Operations will take place on single sideband and CW using multiple transceivers, amplifiers, and both verticals and directional antennas. During the 3-week stay, Jack also plans to do some short sightseeing and possible radio activities from St. Martin, which is FS, Saba, which is PJ6, and St. Bartholomew, which is Fox Juliet. And finally, we have Victor 5, Namibia. Gunter, Delta Kilo 2 Whiskey Hotel, is currently operating as Victor 51 Whiskey Hotel from a farm near Omarumu, Namibia, and will remain active until March 24th, covering frequencies from 160 to 6 meters, including 60 meters. This week, the DX Mentor podcast will feature George, KJ6VU, and a discussion of his station controller system and a new product, iShare Radio. Give it a listen and let me know what you think. And if George's call sounds familiar, KJ6VU, it's because he's the host of the Ham Radio Workbench. So now I have a contest update. The CQ-WPX Contest Committee invites you to participate in the 2026 CQ-WPX Single Sideband Contest, which runs from 0 UTC on 28 March to 23:59 UTC on 29 March, so you got 48 hours. CQ-WPX SSB is the largest, quote, everyone can work everyone for points, end quote, single sideband operating event in the world. It's a phenomenal opportunity to meet friends, build your prefix totals, contribute to your club's efforts, and have fun. All are welcome to encourage and to participate. Now, please take note. New for 2026, logs must be submitted within 48 hours after the end of the contest, which means no later than 23:59 UTC on March 31st. Logs can be uploaded to cqwpx.com log check. We encourage everyone to upload their logs, and participants submitting logs for scoring by the deadline can download certificates once the results are published. So even if you only work for an hour, you can at least get a cool certificate. Please go to cqwpx.com for the full set of rules, past results, records, plaques, and other resources to support your CQ-WPX sideband activities. We wish you all the best and look forward to seeing you in CQ-WPX Single Sideband 2026. And that's from the CQ-WPX Contest Committee. And I will tell you, with a call like AJ8B, the WPX contest for me is a great contest because I'm actually the one they're chasing. So I enjoy the heck out of it. Until next week, this is Bill, AJ8B saying 7-3, and thanks to my XYL Karen for her love and support. I hope to hear you in the pile-ups. Have a great DX week.
Hello, and welcome to the next chapter of Philip Nedlinger's KA4KOE's Dead Electrical Dudes, in which he takes an unusual look at the movers and shakers that helped grow our amateur radio hobby and other radio-related stuff. Philip has presented these dudes on EHAM over the last several years and has granted us permission to use them here on This Week in Amateur Radio. And so we continue with Dead Electrical Dudes number 7. This month's stiff, Heinrich Rudolf Hertz, entered mortal coil 22 February 1857, assumed room temperature 1 January 1894. Perhaps the burning question on Philip's mind is, why did a lot of early electrical pioneers sport such interesting beards? Put a rifle in the picture shown in the website, and you can just imagine Heine walking out of the piney woods after distilling a few hundred gallons of shine. As you may recall, the existence of electromagnetic waves was predicted mathematically by James Clerk Maxwell and was discussed in the first of this series of irreverent articles. Mathematicians, physicists, and scientists will, on occasion, develop elegant formulae that don't amount to much except to illustrate some arcane concept with no practical application. However, such was not the case in this particular instance. Heine took Maxwell's headache-inducing formulae and proved that they did, in fact, describe a natural phenomenon. Hertz was born in Hamburg, Germany. At an early age it became apparent that the boy was scientifically inclined. Young Heine enjoyed building instruments of various types in the family workshop. Hertz began his formal education in 1877 at the University of Munich, where he studied engineering. Only a year later, Hertz abandoned engineering, blasphemy, and began his study of natural sciences at the University of Berlin, studying under Helmholtz and Kirchhoff. Sound familiar? Where he earned his Ph.D. with magna cum laude honors. His mom must have been a very proud woman. A topic of intense interest in the scientific community at the time was determining whether or not Maxwell's equations were valid. In 1883, the young scientist also directed his attention to this course of research. In 1887, Hertz conducted his now famous experiment in which two antennas were placed a few feet apart. The first part of the device consisted of essentially a crude spark gap transmitter connected to the first antenna. The receiving antenna was a loop with a couple of electrodes on the wire ends placed very close together. Hertz activated the transmitter and it generated sparks. Sparks were also seen leaping across the electrode gap to the receiving antenna. Further experiments were conducted in which it was determined that the invisible waves could be reflected and refracted in a manner similar to that of light waves, and finally that light waves were also electromagnetic in nature. Maxwell's theories were finally vindicated 8 years after his death. Hertz's findings were published in 1892 in a book, Untersuchungen über die Beobachtung der elektrischen Kraft, Investigations on the Propagation of Electric Energy. Unfortunately, Hertz died young at the age of 37 from blood poisoning. Associates and friends remember the professor as amiable and modest, and people seem to be naturally attracted to him. In his honor, the unit of frequency measurement, the Hertz, was named after him. A young Italian boy read about Hertz's experiments, and it galvanized his attention. 3 guesses as to who that boy was. Signed, Philip Nedlinger, P.E., KA4KOE. References The Spark Museum, found at http://www.sparkmuseum.com/. With our appreciation to Philip Nedlinger, KA4KOE, for the use of his materials, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, reporting for This Week in Amateur Radio.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. How do you make a hole? That's a pretty straightforward kind of question, and by the time this sentence is finished, there's going to be at least as many answers as people who considered it. I didn't supply any parameters to this hole, so answers could include shovels, collapsing space, fire, a drill, or any number of other interesting approaches. If I narrowed it down to, say, a hole in wood, there'd still be plenty of options. Specifying the type of wood, the diameter, and other parameters would further narrow down the selection of methods. What if I asked you, how do you decode FM? You might wonder if there's more than one way, and I can assure you, just like with making a hole, there's plenty of ways to go about achieving this, even if I limit this to software implementations only. I must confess, when I recently set out to test my SOAPy SDR library notions using a GNU radio flow graph to listen to FM radio, I searched the documentation, found a beginner's tutorial, and used the information there to make my first proof-of-concept FM receiver. I put it on GitHub and went about my business. After finally managing to hear the decode effort and being less than impressed, I started trying to understand the tutorial flow graph. When I started looking at what would be needed to decode stereo FM broadcast radio, I discovered that there were several tutorials, examples, and videos with slightly or significantly different solutions to the problem. That's on top of the over a dozen standard FM-related blocks supplied within GNU Radio. I then set about trying to discover the canonical implementation of an FM receiver, and came up short. Instead, I discovered even more implementations of FM receivers, each subtly different. You should know that there's a difference between how your local hit radio station does FM and how an amateur radio repeater does FM, let alone the local CB radio channels, satellite telemetry, wireless microphones, or even hearing aids. So, within the implementation of an FM receiver, there's additional complexity, which explains to some extent the variety of FM-related blocks within GNU Radio. I think ultimately it's safe to say that there's an unlimited supply of implementations of an FM receiver within GNU Radio. It led me to ask, what is the, for want of a better word, right way, and what does that actually mean? In GNU radio, you string together blocks that process a signal. If you're familiar with flowcharts, the process is very similar. Unlike flowcharts on a piece of paper, in GNU Radio, or should I say GNU Radio Companion, the tool you use to actually design flow graphs, the little blocks represent underlying software, and their connections represent how data flows between these bits of software. In other words, each block represents a series of programming instructions that process data and pass it on. It means that the more blocks you have in your flow graph, the more instructions are running to process data. The more instructions, the more computing resources required. This is significant because in a complex system like this, we're likely to be doing more than one thing at a time. So preserving resources is important, if only to ensure that there's time available to process the next sample. As a result, there's a difference between implementing an FM receiver with 2 blocks or with 10 blocks. You might conclude that 2 blocks is more efficient, but that might not be true. For example, 2 blocks processing 2,000 samples per second each are processing 4,000 samples per second in total. A block that converts the 2,000 samples into 200 samples, followed by 9 blocks processing 200 samples per second each, is processing 3,800 samples in total. All things being equal, the 10 blocks together are handling less data per second. So overall it's potentially using less resources. I say potentially because it might be that one of those blocks is using a massive calculation, consuming more resources than all the other blocks put together. Ultimately, each block is software, so whatever it's doing is using resources. So, how would you go about choosing between 2 implementations or algorithms? Which was the better one, and how is better defined? My first pass at this is to use standard testing files and use the algorithms under consideration to process them. Run the tests multiple times, keep a record of how long they take, and then attempt to measure how much the original input signal differs from the processed output signal. At the moment, I have no idea how you might compare signals, other than to invert one and combine them to see if they cancel each other out, which means that they're the same, or not, which means that they're different. For my sins, in trying to think of a way to do this, I realized that the way I implement this radio contraption needs to be able to deal with test files and potentially multiple different implementations of a decoder. It also means that I have some more thinking to do. Ideally, there needs to be a concept of meta-information, like the radio source, the tuned frequency, the bandwidth, gain, and likely more, so I can set the parameters once and reuse these across whatever else is part of the flow graph. It should be possible to use a test file just as simply as a SOAPy SDR-compatible radio. It should also be possible to hear the audio, or save it to a file, or decode an embedded signal, or all at the same time. In other words, it needs to be flexible. Luckily, GNU Radio is really a collection of libraries built specifically for this task. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the matter. I'm Ono, Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima, Alpha Bravo.
Bruce Page, KK5DO, is here now with this week's AMSAT report. Bruce?
Thanks, John. SilverSat is operational and providing SSDV images on 437.175 MHz using GMSK 9K6. You can get the schedule for transmissions in your part of the world at https://operations.silversat.org/SSDV. The TENCO-2 satellite that was launched last week is operational and going through a commissioning period. The ground station did receive its CW beacon with basic telemetry. They also reported the signal was weaker than expected. The temporary TLEs are NORAD 98542. The IARU has coordinated frequencies for 2 new satellites being built. Lilium 4 is a 6U CubeSat from National Formosa University, set to launch later this year. Luka 01 is Montenegro's first amateur satellite. A timeline for launch of this 1U CubeSat has not been set, but will launch from Roscosmos. For George, W3ASK, may your sunspots be forever favorable. This is Bruce Page, KK5DO. Back to you, John.
And thanks, Bruce, for that report.
It is time for this week's look at the solar weather forecast and the terrestrial propagation forecast. Solar activity was at moderate levels following an M2.7 flare from region 4392 on March 18th. This region has shown sporadic growth and reorganization in the peripheral spots, but has remained relatively unchanged in its magnetic configuration. New region 4397 rotated further onto the visible disk and was numbered, yet remained mostly inactive. The remaining regions were relatively stable and quiescent. The M2.7 flare was accompanied by a 10 flare and a Type 2 radio burst, with an estimated velocity of 740 to 860 kilometers per second. An EUV wave is now visible in GOES-SUVI imagery, along with faint field line movement in the northwest quadrant. The associated coronal mass ejection became visible in SOHO-LASCO C2 imagery early on March 18th. Analysis indicated a possible arrival at Earth early on March 21st. Confidence is fairly low, though, with the fit of this event due to limited C2 coronagraph imagery. Solar activity is expected to be low on March 19th through the 21st, with a chance for M-class minor to moderate level events, due primarily to the minor instability and variability of region 4392. Solar wind parameters reflected near background conditions. Solar wind speed gradually decreased from 450 km per second to end the period at around 380 km per second. The phi angle was predominantly positive. The solar wind environment is expected to become enhanced on March 19th as the March 16th and 17th coronal mass ejections are expected to arrive near midday. The disturbed solar environment is likely to continue as the coronal mass ejection passage persists into March 20th. By March 21st, the coronal mass ejection from March 18th is expected to arrive in conjunction with the onset of a negative polarity coronal hole high-speed stream. So overall, solar activity has been declining over the past 2 weeks, and despite forecasts that generally predicted an increase, it remains low. Furthermore, there is no reason to expect a significant rise, while increases in geomagnetic activity usually reoccur every 27 days. For more information concerning radio propagation, visit the ARRL Technical Information Service, read a quick guide to HF propagation using solar indices, and check out the propagation page of Karl Wetzel-Swab, K9LA. For customizable propagation charts, visit the VOA CAP online for Ham Radio website.
Just ahead in Radio Sport this week, March 19th and 20th, it's the 14th Walk for the Bacon QRP contest. That's CW. March 19th, the NAQCC CW Sprint, CW as well. On March 21st, the PODXS 070 Club St. Patrick's Day contest. That's digital. And on March 21st to the 23rd, it's the BARTG HF RIDI contest. That is digital as well. Remember to visit the ARRL contest calendar for more events and information. Upcoming section, state, and division conventions. March 21st, the St. Patrick's Day Hamfest hosting the ARRL West Texas Section Convention. That's in Midland, Texas. March 28th, the Central Dakota Amateur Radio Club Hamfest hosting the ARRL North Dakota State Convention in Bismarck, North Dakota. And on April 4th, the RARS Fest hosting the ARRL Roanoke Division Convention. That's in Raleigh, North Carolina. And of course, remember to search the ARRL Hamfest Convention and database to find more events in your area. In 2026, ARRL is commemorating America's 250th birthday with a year-long on-the-air celebration, the America 250 Worked All States WAS Award. Running now through December 31st, this special operating event challenges amateurs of all license classes to contact all 50 U.S. states and confirm those QSOs via ARRL's Logbook of the World. Operations begin at 0000 Zulu on Wednesday and end at 2359 Zulu on Tuesday. That's 7 days total for each activation. Currently scheduled now for March 25th, North Dakota, W1AW0, host W0N9. March 25th as well, Oklahoma, W1AW/5, hosted by the Altus Hamfest on March 28th. April 1st, California, W1AW/6. The host there is N76Q. April 1st in Mississippi, W1AW/5. The host is W5UE. And April 1st, North Carolina, W1AW/4. The host is N4XI. You can see complete schedules at www.arrl.org/America250-WAS.
It is time for this week's edition of AMSAT Satellite Shorts from All Over. We begin this week with news from NASA. NASA held a live news conference on March 12th following the Artemis II Flight Readiness Review, confirming the SLS rocket and Orion spacecraft remain in the Vehicle Assembly Building at Kennedy Space Center for final prep work. Repairs to the upper stage helium system from a quick disconnect seal issue are complete, with rollout to the pad expected later this month. The mission targets the first crewed lunar flyby in over 50 years, now aiming for early April launch opportunities. Still with NASA, they report that the officially retired Van Allen Probe A, launched 2012, made an uncontrolled re-entry over the Pacific west of the Galapagos on March 11th. Most of the spacecraft burned up, with a low risk of debris causing harm. Its twin probe B remains in orbit but is non-operational. The probes studied Earth's radiation belts for years. Next up, the European Space Agency has confirmed that its chronograph spacecraft, part of the Proba 3 solar observation mission, has gone silent following an onboard anomaly in mid-February 2026. The incident led to the loss of altitude control, preventing the satellite's solar panels from facing the sun and draining its battery. The spacecraft has since entered survival mode, cutting off all communication with Earth. Meanwhile, Roscosmos completed repairs to the damaged Soyuz Pad 31 at Baikonur Cosmodrome after a November 2025 incident where an unsecured service structure fell during launch. Over 150 personnel restored the site. The pad is the only location where Russia can launch its manned Soyuz capsules, which are a mainstay transport and cargo vehicle for the station. The first relaunch will be a Progress cargo ship to the ISS, targeted for March 22nd. And finally, Texas-based Firefly Aerospace celebrated on March 11th after successfully launching its Alpha rocket for the first time in nearly a year. The mission, called Stairway to 7, was the 7th flight for Alpha, which suffered 2 major mishaps during 2025. The first occurred during the Message in a Booster mission last April, which carried a technology-demonstrating satellite for Lockheed Martin, but failed to deliver it to orbit after an anomaly occurred during stage separation. Then last September, an Alpha first stage exploded on the stand during pre-launch tests. This mishap added months to the mission development timeline as the company investigated a cause and got another booster ready for flight. Alpha Flight 7 achieved nominal performance and validated key systems ahead of the Block 2 configuration upgrade. This test flight also delivered a demonstrator payload for Lockheed Martin. It is time for this week's edition of AMSAT Satellite Shorts from All Over. We begin this week with news from NASA. NASA held a live news conference on March 12th following the Artemis II Flight Readiness Review, confirming the SLS rocket and Orion spacecraft remain in the Vehicle Assembly Building at Kennedy Space Center for final prep work. Repairs to the upper stage helium system from a quick disconnect seal issue are complete, with rollout to the pad expected later this month. The mission targets the first crewed lunar flyby in over 50 years, now aiming for early April launch opportunities. Still with NASA, they report that the officially retired Van Allen Probe A, launched 2012, made an uncontrolled re-entry over the Pacific west of the Galapagos on March 11th. Most of the spacecraft burned up with a low risk of debris causing harm. Its twin Probe B remains in orbit but is non-operational. The probes studied Earth's radiation belts for years. Next up, the European Space Agency has confirmed that its chronograph spacecraft, part of the Proba 3 solar observation mission, has gone silent following an onboard anomaly in mid-February 2026. The incident led to the loss of altitude control, preventing the satellite's solar panels from facing the sun and draining its battery. The spacecraft has since entered survival mode, cutting off all communication with Earth. Meanwhile, Roscosmos completed repairs to the damaged Soyuz Pad 31 at Baikonur Cosmodrome after a November 2025 incident where an unsecured service structure fell during launch. Over 150 personnel restored the site. The pad is the only location where Russia can launch its manned Soyuz capsules, which are a mainstay transport and cargo vehicle for the station. The first relaunch will be a Progress cargo ship to the ISS, targeted for March 22nd. And finally, Texas-based Firefly Aerospace celebrated on March 11th after successfully launching its Alpha rocket for the first time in nearly a year. The mission, called Stairway to 7, was the 7th flight for Alpha, which suffered 2 major mishaps during 2025. The first occurred during the Message in a Booster mission last April, which carried a technology demonstrating satellite for Lockheed Martin, but failed to deliver it to orbit after an anomaly occurred during stage separation. Then last September, an Alpha first stage exploded on the stand during pre-launch tests. This mishap added months to the mission development timeline as the company investigated a cause and got another booster ready for flight. Alpha Flight 7 achieved nominal performance and validated key systems ahead of the Block 2 configuration upgrade. This test flight also delivered a demonstrator payload for Lockheed Martin.
George Jacobs, W3ASK, an icon in the world of amateur radio and shortwave broadcasting, passed away last July. Jacobs, a World War II veteran and ARRL life member, was perhaps best known to hams as CQ Magazine's propagation editor for more than 50 years, from early 1951 until the end of 2001. Former CQ editor Rich Mosen, W2VU, recalled that George's primary goal through his tenure as propagation editor was to make ionospheric science understandable to the average ham, and to relate what we now call space weather to the conditions amateurs might expect on the bands. The tables he developed for the CQ Shortwave Propagation Handbook help hams make their own propagation predictions before the days of computers and the internet. Jacobs also contributed an annual propagation summary for many years to the World Radio and TV Handbook. In addition, he was part of the Project Oscar, orbiting satellite carrying amateur radio team that had built and launched the first amateur radio satellites, and was instrumental in the formation of AMSAT, the Radio Amateur Satellite Corporation, to carry on the amateur satellite program. In the world of shortwave broadcasting engineering, Jacobs led the design and development of the Voice of America's worldwide network starting in 1949, and he oversaw technical development and operations for VOA, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, and Radio Marty. Retiring in 1980 as Director of Engineering for the State Department's Board of International Broadcasting. A founding member of the National Association of Shortwave Broadcasters, Jacobs' work continued to be in the field of private consultant until his passing on July 3, 2025, just days short of his 101st birthday.
Fuji Oscar 29, or FO29, also known as JAS-2, the Japanese amateur radio satellite launched in August of '96, has entered a new operational phase as of early March. Approaching its 30th anniversary in orbit, the satellite, long limited by failed batteries, relies entirely on solar panel illumination for its power now. In February, the FO29 control team operated from Japan, continued scheduled activations of the linear transponder. Operators noticed the unstable condition was due to the satellite's age, with activations sometimes failing if the onboard voltage did not respond quickly. The transponder operates in mode V/U, inverting sideband and CW. Around March 9, when the FO-29 transitioned into a full sunlight orbit season, this eliminated the periodic eclipses. AMSAT highlighted this in the early February bulletin, noting that shadow duration had decreased dramatically from 20 minutes to 1 minute per orbit by mid-February, leading to the full sun entry on March 9. Observers reported recent CW beacon and telemetry reception, with stations logging data. On March 13, amateur operators reported successful sideband and CW QSOs during the pass, but busy activity with calls from Japan. One operator described a very busy pass with multiple contacts. Another logged several sideband and CW exchanges, despite windy conditions affecting reception. AMSAT's live linear satellite summaries and status pages list FO-29 as active under full sunlight conditions, with the transponder remaining on until the voltage drops below a safe threshold, no longer an issue in continuous sunshine. The digital modes remain inactive, and the digitalker on 435.910 MHz is rarely used. This full sunlight period offers a welcome revival for one of the oldest active analog linear transponders in the amateur fleet. Enthusiasts are encouraged to monitor, log contacts via the AMSAT Oscar status page, and share reports to help track performance.
Amazon says drones damaged 3 facilities in the UAE and Bahrain. The incidents occurred on Sunday morning, with Amazon Web Services saying at the time that objects had hit a data center in the UAE, creating sparks and fire. Also on Sunday, Amazon Web Services said it was investigating power and connectivity issues at a facility in Bahrain. On Monday, the company confirmed that drone strikes had caused the outages. 2 UAE facilities were hit directly, while in Bahrain, a drone strike in close proximity to one of our facilities caused physical impacts to our infrastructure. The company said the drones caused structural damage, disrupted power delivery to infrastructure, and in some cases required fire suppression activities that resulted in additional water damage. The incidents highlight the vulnerability of key technology infrastructure like data centers during military conflicts.
Hams in the Australian state of New South Wales are worried that they will no longer be able to afford their vital repeater sites. Faced with fee hikes on state-owned land, known as Crown land, they say they simply aren't budgeted for extra expense. Amateurs in New South Wales are troubled by what they believe are prohibitive fee hikes recently put in place for access to Crown land. Calling the situation unsustainable for amateur repeaters and other equipment installed there, the president of the Goulburn and Southern Highlands Amateur Radio Society has written a letter to the ham clubs around the state, urging members to contact their members of parliament. In his open letter to the clubs, Peter Chatwin, VK2PET, the Radio Society's president, noted that new or continued access to elevated Crown land sites for repeaters and towers could cost clubs as much as 20,000 AU per annum. Peter said that the hams need to substantiate their own club's financial hardship by forwarding examples to Steve Cook, member of the Cootamundra and Shadow Minister for Crown Lands. Peter wrote, "It is important that we provide genuine, practical examples of how these costs are affecting clubs across New South Wales." He said that groups in rural areas, as well as those providing emergency communications and training, rely on robust, functioning networks that include these sites.
On March 5, 2026, the FCC released a draft notice of proposed rulemaking seeking comment on proposals to expand spectrum access for in-space servicing, assembly and manufacturing, and other emergent space operations it has dubbed Weird Space Stuff. The Commission will vote on the draft NPRM at its March 26th open meeting. If adopted, comments will be due 30 days after the NPRM's publication in the Federal Register, and reply comments will be due 30 days thereafter. The draft NPRM aims to support space innovation by codifying policies to alleviate spectrum shortcomings and make spectrum abundant for emergent space operations. In particular, it proposes to broaden regulatory classifications, allowing current spectrum licensees to leverage existing spectrum assets in innovative ways and facilitate spectrum availability for emergent space operations. The FCC proposes to authorize the potential use of frequency piggybacking for ISAM and other emergent operations, which would allow spacecraft to communicate in frequency bands already authorized for use by another spacecraft, while the two spacecraft are connected or working together in close proximity to each other. The draft NPRM looks to identify spectrum bands that could potentially be used more intensively, seeking comment on non-federal spectrum bands that could accommodate emergent space operations. The Commission notes that it is particularly interested in identifying bands that either are not shared with federal users or that are shared with but not used intensively by federal users and are allocated on a secondary basis for federal use. The draft NPRM proposes to add a secondary, non-federal space operations service allocation in the Earth-to-space direction in the 2030 to 2035 MHz band and permit the band's exclusive licensee, SiriusXM, to lease spectrum to Earth station operators for this purpose.
Dayton Hamvention has announced its 2026 awards. The Technical Achievement Award goes to Robert Famiglio, K3RF. Robert B. Bob Famiglio, K3RF, has spent almost 60 years in amateur radio, blending technical expertise, legal knowledge, and leadership in emergency communications. Licensed at age 13, Famiglio later earned a BSc in electrical engineering and a doctorate in law. For more than 40 years, he has served as volunteer counsel, advising hams on PRB-1 matters, zoning and antenna ordinances, RFI enforcement, and club governance. His technical understanding of station engineering and interference resolution has informed effective legal strategies and regulatory comments. Famiglio served in many ARRL leadership roles, including EPA Section Manager, Atlantic Division Vice Director, and later Director. He also served several terms as Vice President and General Counsel of the Radio Club of America and functioned as Corporate Counsel for the board. In emergency communications, he served as Amateur Radio Emergency Service District Emergency Coordinator for Greater Philadelphia, supporting regional response agencies by applying technical expertise, message handling skills, and interoperability between amateur and public safety systems. His formal training as a professional firefighter enhanced his ability to align ham radio technology with operational needs of served agencies. A longtime mentor, Famiglio supports on-air training nets and club programs stressing technical competence, regulatory literacy, and readiness for public service. He believes that amateur radio's core value lies in the skills, service, and technical capability of operators, not merely spectrum access, and he has worked to translate complex technical issues, spectrum coexistence, interference mitigation, and regulatory compliance into clear, actionable recommendations for policymakers. His blend of engineering, legal acumen, and emergency response experience has encouraged continuous training, lowered barriers to participation, and inspired new generations of ham radio operators. The Amateur of the Year award goes to Dr. Jose Otis Vicens, NP4G. Dr. Vicens was born and raised in Humacao, Puerto Rico. He was first licensed at the age of 16 and is the only amateur radio operator in his family. Vicens studied biology at Purdue University, where he became active with the W9YB Purdue University Amateur Radio Club. He graduated from the University of Puerto Rico School of Dental Medicine and completed a specialty program in pediatric dentistry at Brookdale University Hospital and Medical Center in Brooklyn, New York. In 2008, Vicens returned to his hometown of Humacao to begin practicing orthodontics. One of his early memories of service through amateur radio was in 1998, when Vicens helped provide communication support in Puerto Rico following Hurricane George. During the 2017 Puerto Rico hurricane disasters, he helped coordinate amateur radio emergency communications across eastern Puerto Rico. Vicens recalled attending the DX Forum at Dayton Hamvention, where presentations on major DXpeditions inspired him to someday be part of future adventures. He has now participated in many DXpeditions from all over the world, including Bouvet Island, 3Y, and most recently as team leader for KP5/NP3VI, the Desaseo Island DXpedition of 2026. He is a past president of the Puerto Rico Amateur Radio League and is currently president of the International DX Association. The Special Achievement Award goes to Martha Fell, N3QBE, and Joe Fell, W3GMS. Martha and Joe Fell's journey began in 1966 when Joe earned his novice license, WN3GMS, at the age of 14. Shortly thereafter, he met Harry Davis, W3FDY, who is now a silent key, who mentored him for 4 years. Harry taught him to think critically, design circuits, and execute projects with precision. His guidance was life-changing, and Joe pledged to honor his request to give back to others, just as Harry had done for him. To fulfill this promise, Joe chose to retire at the age of 56, following a 34-year corporate career and the successful launch of his own company. The success of this mission is thanks to his wife, Martha, whose dedication to overseeing administration and logistics has greatly benefited their students. Their program's reach has grown significantly over the decades. In 1976, Joe designed and built a repeater for his mentor's radio site, which remains operational 50 years later, serving a group of approximately 85 operators. Their weekly technical net has become a primary resource for both new and seasoned amateurs, including many professional electrical engineers. Today, Martha and Joe Fell mentor students of all ages and interests. While their first student is pursuing a PhD in electrical engineering at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, their youngest student started at just 8 years old. And finally, the year of the club goes to the Long Island CW Club, or LICW. Long Island CW Club is an online Morse code training community built to help hams become confident and proficient CW operators. The club emphasizes high standards alongside a welcoming culture, focusing on teaching practical operational skills while fostering mutual respect and a spirit of learning for fun. LICW offers structured classes from beginner through advanced, a wide range of topical forums and practice resources that help students move from copying characters to true conversational flow. Instructors are volunteers who remember what it felt like to be new and who coach students through plateaus with clear, effective teaching methods, encouragement, and accountability. LICW includes strong participation and leadership across generations, including more than 400 women who serve as instructors and club leaders, along with programs that support youth and hams with disabilities. LICW is a community where people show up for each other, celebrate progress, and share the joy of CW on the air. The 2026 Dayton Hamvention will be held Friday, May 15th through Sunday, May 17th, 2026 at the Greene County Fair and Expo Center, 210 Fairground Road, Xenia, Ohio.
As National Weather Service forecast offices began their spring education campaigns for the United States, the Skywarn YouthNet wants to bring that mission to the airwaves. November Zero Alpha, the special event station for the Skywarn YouthNet, is back on the air for their second annual event. Operating from March 15th through March 29th, this initiative aims to encourage amateur radio operators across the United States and around the world to prioritize severe weather awareness and emergency preparedness. Skywarn YouthNet manager Caleb Sfar, Kilo Echo Zero, Foxtrot Oscar Echo, said, "Our goal with this special event station is to educate the amateur radio community about the dangers of severe weather and the importance of being prepared. The station will be operating SSB and FT8 on all HF bands at various times during the day and night as time permits. In an environment where seconds save lives, the November Zero Alpha event serves as a critical reminder to the ham radio community to establish situational awareness before severe weather strikes. For more information on the Skywarn YouthNet, you can visit skywarnyouth.net.
NASA astronaut Mike Finka, KE-5 AIT, Crew 11 pilot and commander of the International Space Station's Expedition 74, has revealed that it was his medical issue that prompted the evacuation of the 4 Crew 11 astronauts from the space station in January. The exact nature of his ailment remains undisclosed, but Finka's statement clarified that the issue, while not considered an emergency, required advanced medical imaging not available on the space station. As a result, Finka and his crewmates, NASA astronaut Zena Cardman, KJ-5CMN, Japanese Space Agency astronaut Kamiya Yui, KG-5BPH, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Oleg Platonov returned to Earth aboard the Crew Dragon Endeavour on January 15th, about a month earlier than originally planned. The issue arose on January 7th while Finka and Cardman were preparing for an upcoming spacewalk. The agency is monitoring a medical concern with a crew member that arose Wednesday afternoon aboard the orbital complex, NASA officials said in an emailed statement on January 7th, declining to elaborate on the nature of that concern or the astronaut it affected. Then, on January 8th, the agency announced that Crew 11 would end early so the issue could be addressed here on Earth. Crew 11 splashed down aboard Endeavour in the Pacific Ocean off the coast of San Diego on January 15th, leaving a skeleton crew of 3 aboard the ISS. SpaceX's Crew 12 mission was originally slated to launch in mid-February, with a typical handover period between them and Crew 11 expected after their arrival in low Earth orbit, allowing the newcomers time to acclimate to microgravity and life aboard the station. Efforts by SpaceX and NASA allowed for an earlier target date of their Falcon 9 launch aboard Crew Dragon Freedom, which lifted off February 13th and returned the ISS to its regular crew complement of 7.
The International Amateur Radio Union Satellite Frequency Coordination Committee has recently completed frequency coordination for 2 CubeSat missions, Taiwan's Lilium 4 and Montenegro's Luca 01. These coordinations ensure that the satellites can operate without interfering with other space-based communications, paving the way for their upcoming launches and contributions to scientific research, education, and ham radio communities worldwide. Lilium 4, a 6U CubeSat developed by National Formosa University, is set to enhance amateur radio connectivity and optical experimentation in space. The satellite, with call sign BN0YCA, will feature a 1200 bit per second AX.25 APRS digipeater on 145.825 MHz for global intercommunication among radio enthusiasts. It also includes UHF telemetry downlink at 437.850 MHz and a high-bandwidth S-band downlink at 2405.0 MHz for monitoring an onboard optical payload. Additional capabilities involve a VU repeater with uplink at 145.980 MHz and downlink at 435.250 MHz, plus GNSS positioning using the L1 signal at 1575.42 MHz. The mission focuses on student-led studies of space-to-ground optical signal acquisition, with unencrypted telemetry encouraging public participation in decoding and link budget validation. IARU coordination for Lilium 4 was finalized on January 31, 2026, following a submission in late December 2025. The satellite is slated for launch no earlier than mid-March 2026 aboard a SpaceX rocket from Vandenberg Space Force Base, targeting a 510-kilometer polar orbit. Luca 01 represents Montenegro's entry into amateur satellite technology, spearheaded by Montenegro Space Research. This one CubeSat is designed for educational outreach, equipped with a charged particle sensor and a miniature camera to capture Earth's surface images. It will transmit special slow-scan television images and telemetry data to engage radio amateurs, students, and schoolchildren, using an open protocol for easy reception with affordable equipment. The mission aims to inspire young people in amateur radio and space science, including efforts to image various orbital objects. Downlinks have been coordinated on UHF frequencies, 437.180 MHz primary and 436.150 MHz spare, employing GMSK modulation at rates between 2.4 kilobits per second and 19.2 kilobits per second. Coordination was completed on March 13, 2026, after an application submitted on February 6, 2026. Lucas 01 is planned for a Roscosmos launch from the Vostochny Cosmodrome into a 500 to 600 kilometer sun-synchronous orbit.
There's a new challenge to give more hams the chance to work Sardinia Island. As for 10 years, the Sardinian Regional Radio Group, Team DX Koros, has focused on growing the community of amateur radio DXers. As its members mark the group's 10th anniversary, they've teamed up with the Puerto Torres section of ARRL, the national nonprofit organization representing hams in Italy, to help land Sardinia and as many logbooks as possible. The Sardinia Island DXCCE 225 Challenge began earlier this month, offering gold, silver, and bronze certificates and a chance for some operators to record a new log entry. Their focus is until May 1st is to call CQ, is IR0SAR. Sardinia Island is recognized as an independent DX entity and a much sought-after one. Long known and appreciated for its ancient ruins and other links to history, Sardinia can now be pursued with extra intensity for its standing among DXers.
The YL Worldwide Award, the first international amateur radio event dedicated exclusively to female operators, just concluded on March 16th. YLs, which is short for young ladies, actually describes female amateur radio operators of all ages. Across the world, YLs joined together for a single operating event called YL Worldwide Award from March 9th through the 16th. Using the Ham Award platform, YLWWA saw 300 activators from 51 countries generate over 300,000 QSOs in 1 week, chased by approximately 50,000 hunters from 203 countries. Veronica Wiggin, DL4 VER, one of the event organizers, said, "It was awesome to see the outstanding cooperation and enthusiasm of the YLs as well as the OMs. Complete beginners who had only obtained their licenses a few months ago worked hand-in-hand with experienced female radio operators. The pile-ups were overwhelming." At the close of the event at midnight UTC, March 16th, even though conditions were very difficult, there are more YLs on the air than at any time during the week. The project was coordinated by the YL unit of the German Amateur Radio Club under the leadership of Haight DL3HD and Veronica DL4 VER in collaboration with the international WWA team, Max IW1 FRU and Carlo IK1 HJS. For more information about the YLWWA, visit hamaward.cloud.
This week in amateur radio is holding open auditions for news anchors for the weekly national worldwide amateur radio news service. If you have a good radio voice and can reliably read provided news copy, we are looking for you. This, of course, is an all-volunteer position. An amateur radio license is not required. You must have a high-quality microphone, headset mics are not used, and be familiar with audio editing software to record and edit your finished news stories before uploading. If you would like to try out for a weekly or bi-weekly anchor position with North America's premier amateur radio news on air and podcast, please send an email to our producer, George, W2XBS. You can include a sample MP3 of yourself reading news copy sent as an attachment to W2XBS77@gmail.com. That's whiskey, the number 2, X-ray Bravo Sierra 77@gmail.com. Be sure and use Anchor Audition in the subject line. Please include your phone number and a good window of time for a callback to discuss your submission and our operating logistics to see if This Week in Amateur Radio is a good fit for you. We hope to hear from you soon.
And finally this week, filmmaker Preston Booth from Starkville, Mississippi, was hired to shoot a small portrait documentary about a local businessman to celebrate his 82nd birthday. That's when he met Martin F. Jew and learned about the company he built, MFJ Enterprises. According to a post on Reddit, Booth said that once I got to meet Martin and the team, I realized that their story really deserved a feature-length production to best tell their story, and I've been moonlighting this project in my free time ever since. Booth said that he spent a significant amount of time with Jew and his family, friends, and staff. Booth learned about his background, how he grew up, what drew him into amateur radio, and why he started MFJ. He learned that Martin grew up in a family that owned a small grocery store, developed a love of radio at a very young age, and had to build his own equipment from spare parts supplied by a local electronics repairman because his family was poor. After earning his master's degree from Georgia Tech, he moved back home to run the family store so his brother could take time off to travel. It was there that he learned the fundamentals of running a business, marketing, and client relations. These would go on to help him when he started MFJ. According to Booth, Jew viewed MFJ not only as a way to provide affordable products for the average ham, but also as a way to offer locals the opportunity to work. He mentioned that MFJ's first production line was actually staffed by students from Jew's classes at Mississippi State University, where he taught. They built the products in exchange for extra credit and some spending money.
Many of the news and information items heard in this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio have been provided by the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL Audio News Service, and the ARRL Letter, AMSAT, the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Shortwave Listening Post, the Federal Communications Commission, the Radio Society of Great Britain, and Ofcom, the South African Radio League, the International Amateur Radio Union, the Wireless Institute of Australia and the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters, the Amateur Radio Newsline, the Rain Hamcast, Eric Guth, 4Z1UG and QSO Today, QRZ.com, the International Telecommunications Union, the 425DX News, Parks on the Air, and the Soda Reflector, and various news sources on the Internet. This Week in Amateur Radio is heard around the world on amateur radio repeater systems, streaming on the Internet, or on great low-power FM broadcast stations like WGXC-FM, part of the Wavefarm, on 90.7 MHz in Akron, New York, serving Greene County and the southern regions of New York's Capital District.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, that wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio, here on our network flagship repeater, K2RHI. We would like to take this opportunity to thank K2RHI for use of the repeater to bring the greater capital area amateur operators this informative weekly news service. And now for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and our news team around the world, this is Will Rogers, K5WLR in Fayetteville, Arkansas, wishing you 73.